Hey, there I am. Hey, everybody. It's Jonathan. Last minute, man, it's kind of nuts here. Got some glitches, got some technical glitches. I apologize for that. So I'm a little late, little later than I wanted to check in tonight. So listen, if you are checking in live, if you are on Instagram, welcome to everybody. If you are on Facebook or YouTube, hey. So looking forward to tonight. So change the time, going on 8 o'clock Eastern now, answering questions from parents and coaches and athletes. If this is the first time you're checking me out, I'm Olympian Jonathan Edwards. I run athletespecific.com. I work with aspiring athletes and their families who have big athletic dreams and who are trying to make big things happen. So if that is not you, then some of the topics that I talk about may be a little bit cringy. They may not mesh real well with you. So if you are if you are a soft soul, this may hit you the wrong way. Hey there, who's that? I can't see the name on that one, but checking in a little bit. So what I want everybody to understand tonight is that so first, new format a little bit. Got 3 questions to answer tonight. I hope that you will do me if you could do me a solid and share this with somebody who an athlete or a parent with an athlete or a coach who works with athletes. If you share this with them, I sure would appreciate it. And wherever you are, if you would give this a like, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, give me a like, a comment. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Lucas John. There, really like all that energy kind of goes out into the Facebook algorithms and the YouTube algorithms and puts energy out there. And a lot of people, it just helps spread the word. So we're going to be starting small tonight. And if you're watching the replay again, I really appreciate it. Just leave me a like or things like that would be really helpful. So thanks so much. And always, if you're checking on Instagram or if you're on Facebook, just leave me a quick little comment. Let me know where you're from and maybe what your sport is. That way I know kind of more and more about my audience each and every night. That'd be great. So looking forward to it. So, and again, hit everybody on Instagram. So you're going to be kind of looking up my nose a little bit tonight because my tripods are low, and that's all good. All right, so listen, the first question I had tonight, or I should start by saying, like, if you haven't been over to athletespecific.com and downloaded my free automatic negative thought guide for athletes, you might want to check that out. And share that if you got an athlete kind of in your sphere that deals with, like, they're really talented, super talented, but they're not really great. They're not really coming through mentally on game day. Share that with them. I sure would appreciate it, though. Chris Kunkel, I see you there. Good to see you from Frederick, Maryland. Awesome, love it. And Lax and golf. We're gonna work on that. So really good. So let me just get started tonight. So first question I had tonight was from a dad. Actually, this was kind of interesting because this was rather stressful. So for a lot of my athletes, this is recruiting season. Even with COVID, it is recruiting season. And one of the things that's really kind of come up is, for this dad, he wrote me and said, "Listen, my daughter has finally gotten recruited to go to college, but yet she's now got cold feet." And as a family, they actually have a little bit of cold feet now because they've been working towards this for about 6 years, right? Ever since this athlete was in about 6th or 7th grade, she kind of set out the goal to. Oh, my mic is way down here. Can you guys hear me better? That's probably better. So she set out the goal to play in college. She finally got recruited, and the sport is irrelevant actually to everybody. But now that she finally got it done, she's having second thoughts. And so one of the things that this happens a fair bit. This is almost like, one of the ways that I kind of think about this is that if you finally got engaged and then you were going to go through with the marriage, right? Having those little bits of cold feet can be really are bound to come up. And so one of the things that I tell my athletes who get into this situation is that if you've worked hard enough and now you're lucky enough to get into this situation, the best way to avoid this cold feet situation is to avoid this situation altogether. And what I mean by that is doing your due diligence. And one of the things that happens is in the whole kind of athlete recruiting process, the focus on playing your sport in college. So for some of my Olympic athletes, they have the ability to compete at the Olympic Games, but then they also have the ability to compete in their sport in college. So whether that's like swimming or ice hockey or soccer, gymnastics, not so much gymnastics, but the idea is that um, you can be so focused on the sports side of things that you really forget about the life side of things when when it comes into play. And now with COVID has thrown a little wrinkle into all this too, because now there's questions about the college and the university experience, which we didn't have to ask before, right? So we might have asked for an athlete like, well, if I get injured, what happens to me? But now we have a question like, well, if COVID hits my school, what's going to happen? And so it's created more of a demand on our universities and things like that and colleges to decide like, okay, listen, if your athlete's at our school and then we get COVID going down on their team or their program, what are we going to do with them? Are we throwing them into a hotel for 2 weeks? Like, how's this going to happen? Like, where are they going to eat? Are they getting to get sent home? Like, are we going to infect grandma? All that stuff comes into play. So the idea here is that we have new questions to ask about this experience. And part of for this athlete who's having cold feet at this point, this is part of the reason why it's coming up. Okay. So to be expected, right? This is kind of a weird time. But some questions that need to kind of come into play before an athlete like gets off to university is, the size of the school, right? Is it a big school like Ohio State, or is it a small school like Amherst in Massachusetts, right? Is it far away from home or is it close to home, right? That can be a factor. The athletic opportunity for the athlete at the school, right, can now, especially now with COVID, is it worth it, right? Like, are you going to go and like you're not going to start and you got to tough it out for 2 years, and then you maybe get a chance to play if everything goes well. But if COVID hits, then what happens, right? These are now we now have to ask different questions, right, to kind of get our athletes kind of sorted. And the more we can ask them ahead of time, the better we when things finally happen, when we get married, so to speak, we have a better understanding of what's going to come down. Another factor that I tell all my athletes to be careful of is the major, right? So their academic major. I share this because for athletes that are playing, like, let's say Division I level in their sport, coaches will sell their school if they have a major that the athlete is suited for. But then once that athlete gets on campus, it's a little bit of a bait and switch. I had an athlete a number of years ago go to Johns Hopkins and wanted to be a med student. And the coaches, the head coach, the coaching staff sold this athlete like, yeah, that we totally make that happen. Once he got to campus, it was kind of like, probably not going to happen. Or more like, it's not going to happen. Don't even try. And I can't remember what degree he ended up with, but instead of getting to a school like Johns Hopkins and graduating with a medical degree, which Johns Hopkins is known for, this Division I athlete left that school with not as exciting, let's just put it that way, not as exciting a degree. Okay. And so it's important to understand, because if your athlete is going to university and maybe even they're scholarship, you got chance to make the most out of that money educationally. And now if that's not in the play, then that's a bit of a waste. But it's part of the game of playing like Division I sports, which is unfortunate. One of the things that I tell my families to do when they get to, when they're going through the process of deciding on a school to go to is the idea of talking to alumni. And I'm not talking about current athletes within the program, because they too are doing a little bit of a sales job, right? They want, hey, if you're a good athlete, they want you to come to their school as opposed to going to another school. The problem is that sales mentality is a little, it can sway them, even their story. Uh, when I one of the schools that I got recruited to out of high school uh, was Roanoke in Virginia, and they did the most hardcore recruiting job ever. I got a letter, a handwritten or typed letter from uh, Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, who went to Roanoke. Now, I wasn't a Simpsons fan, but I still got this letter from Matt Groening, and that was pretty damn cool. So, um, you got to be careful in this process. But and talking to the alumni who have graduated from the program, they're a little bit, some of them are going to have some distance enough to give you some true story about the program, like what the coaches really like, what the assistant coaches are really like, what life is like on campus. Do you have a social life? Do you have time to do this or do that or whatever? So getting to the alumni is really important. I dealt with an athlete. This was 2 years ago. Finally got to her dream school and actually went as a walk-on, had not been recruited, but went as a walk-on to this school, and didn't really talk to the alumni because she was a walk-on. She didn't really have any conversations with the current teammates, like current team. But once she got on campus, she realized like the head coach was not what she thought she was, and that the program was a bit of a gong show, and had a bit of a rough freshman year. Ended up staying, but probably would have gone somewhere else had she talked to the alumni. Okay, so really important to understand. Mark Cope, and I see you. Adam Hetrick, good to see you. This is awesome. Who else we got checking in here? Ellis Redford, good to see you. Salem, hey, right down. Ellis Redford down in Roanoke in Salem. One of the reasons why I didn't go to Roanoke was because it was like in the woods. But anyway, great program. Bill Pilot lacrosse down there, fantastic program, an icon of the sport. So it would have been a lot of fun, I think, had I gone. So, but it's totally normal. What I told this dad who wrote me, what I told this dad is like, it's totally normal for your athlete to have second thoughts, to go through a period of like, hey, you finally committed to a school, but now you're kind of like, what about, maybe I should have gone to that other school, or what about this, what about that? So, it's totally normal. So what I recommend in this situation is that an athlete, all right, listen, if an athlete is feeling kind of anxious and nervous about this process right now, the idea is to just kind of sit and wait for a little bit. Don't make any rash decisions in kind of in a high kind of anxiety moment. Now, if there's some deadlines pending, obviously that's going to affect your decision. But the idea here is if you can get a little bit of clarity, if you can set back a little bit and just kind of think and get back to the original reasons why you decided on this school versus others, then you're more apt to come either like let it settle down and go, no, everything's gonna be good. Again, going back to that marriage analogy, getting a little bit of those cold feet's totally normal, but sitting back and just going like, okay, yeah, maybe I should have married that other guy. Not necessarily gonna happen. It's important to just kind of take it easy. Going back to the COVID question, one of the things I asked this dad, and this was a factor, was that this year when COVID hit the school, it was a bit of a gong show. It wasn't very well thought out. Parents were home hearing that their kids were now like not in their dorm and they were someplace else, and they were in a hotel, and it just seemed weird. And as a parent, obviously that's going to create a little bit of anxiety. But again, like I said, it's a new level of kind of due diligence to ask the program, like, hey, what's going to happen if this goes south? What did you do last year? And now we're not even a full year into COVID, but we're still getting some experience, especially with fall programs, to go like, well, how does the school handle this? Like, what's going to go on, right? And that those are valid questions to ask. Okay, And you got to understand, as a consumer, right? I think we give too much credit to college coaches because they will sell you on the fact that they're going to raise your athlete to be a human being, right? Like an adult, right? They're gonna teach them not, the best one I love is like they're not gonna be just a player on our program. We're gonna turn them into men, and that resonates with some people. But the truth is that as a consumer, sending your kid off to university, off to college, you got to think like, okay, what am I really getting out of this person? Because that coach unless they're like they've been at that school for a long time, they may be looking for their next job, right? They may be trying to level up from that school they're at now, they're recruiting your athlete for, and they're trying to get to a better program. That may happen, right? So that's where you got to have a little bit of a relationship with the assistant coaches and find out like, well, what's going to go on here if that coach is no longer there. Years ago, I had an athlete in Canada go down to Limestone, Division II school. The coach that recruited him and gave him some scholarship money got fired. And the assistant coach that took over didn't like this kid. So you can imagine that was a little bit of a rough go. Ultimately, this athlete transferred from Limestone and went to McGill, which was cool because this athlete didn't get into McGill straight away out of high school, but by going to Limestone and really hustling for a year academically, ended up getting into McGill kind of through a bit of a back door, which was great. So it wasn't all lost, and that's important to understand. But I think we'd like to avoid those situations if possible. Okay. For my athletes who have Olympic aspirations, so they may be at a university and they're competing in their sport at the university, but they want to, um, they're going to end up elsewhere, right? They've got higher aspirations than just university. One of the questions to ask now is like, all right, well, will this, like, if COVID hits, what happens to like, am I able to train here? Like, am I able to improve despite the situation that I'm in? And that's not always easy, right? But one of the things, and I'll share this story in a second, but one of my families did actually really interesting. They deferred a year, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So what do you do in this situation? One, you take a breather. If the athlete's having cold feet, you take a breather and you give it some time, not to think about it for a couple days, a couple weeks, right? You obviously you want to reassess the situation and find out like what has anything changed. If nothing has changed, then you're going back to the original information that you went on, right? And go like, okay, why did I decide here was better than there? And one of the things that can happen is the athlete's interest can change, and COVID has thrown a little bit of a new layer into this, like a value layer, right? I've talked over the years about how like in every sport, values and performance collide at some point, right? And you might not know what your values are until something arises. Like COVID, right? You may go like, "Oh, I totally want to go to this school," but if if we get shut down, maybe I don't want to go, right? Maybe I don't want to deal with that now, right? And that's important important conversation to have. The option of deferring a year is something that is again a valid choice, right? I would say 75% of the time when I'm working with an athlete going from high school into college, I'm always leaning to them taking a year off to develop like mentally, emotionally, physically. As an American who lives in Canada, in Canada, we start our kids in school a lot earlier than we do in the States. So like today I was on the phone with an eighth grader from Texas who my daughter is 12. This girl is 13, right? Uh, I think, mentally, emotionally, physically, being a year older, going to school, it can only benefit you. I really, it can only benefit you. And rushing into college life is I think for some kids is not necessarily the right thing to do, and that extra year can really help them. Okay. And depending on scholarship money and things like that, that is obviously going to affect that decision. but the family that I was going to tell you about a second ago, they decided to, they decided to take the money that they were going to basically invest in this first year of university. When COVID hit, they said, you know what, we're going to hold off and we're going to take that money and we're going to invest into a home gym, like basically a home workout training facility for their athlete. And they created like a ridiculous training facility, right? Like it has all the bells and whistles that you need anywhere. And this athlete is like just super happy and content. And right now they're in Europe, but they're able to just kind of focus and train, and school's going to wait for them, right? And that's fine, because then they're just going to see what ends up with COVID and what ends up with God, that was all these housing issues and things like that with school. It was kind of weird. But by giving some time to make this decision, like let's just let this athlete kind of settle through the cold feet point. And another thing that throws a wrench into some athletes, and parents need to kind of really be gentle here and dig a little bit, is that is there like a new like love interest, right? That is keeping an athlete from going at all, or maybe they want to go someplace else. That's always a factor. And I wrote about this in my book, In An Athlete's Guide to Winning in Sports and Life, that distractions for athletes are inevitable. And it's kind of like rain. Like if it's going to rain, you'll bring an umbrella, right? Or you're going to wear some waterproof clothes. You don't just go out like, hey, it's not going to rain, right? And just assume the worst, and so or the best. Assume the best. In this case, preparing your athlete that, hey, this may come up, and it's gonna distract you, quote unquote, like to give us some air quotes. It's important to understand kind of how to deal with that before it comes up, and so it doesn't basically cause your athlete confusion where confusion doesn't need to be. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so you got any questions, or if that made sense to anybody, give me a thumbs up, a like. Feel free to leave me a comment as well if you're on YouTube or Facebook, whatnot. It's coming through on my screen here. I'm going to create a second banner here and get this up on the screen. Add the banner. So this is an interesting question. I get this question probably 3 or 4 times a year, and from parents that reach out to me. And if you've got a question for me, you can reach out to Coach Edwards at athletespecific.com. And this past year, with one of my athletes in our coaching program, we had, so this is what the question is. So the dad asked, like, he wants to know if their athletes should be using the team strength and conditioning coach, or if they should be investing in someone else. Okay. And so an important thing to understand here is that let me give you a quick little evolution of sports training and youth sports training. Basically, in 2000, we saw the world of personal training and strength and conditioning just explode. And I was part of that because, well, anyway, I won't get into those details, but starting in the 2000s, early 2000s, that's when the business of training youth athletes just exploded. And as it should. Like, we had personal trainers, we had gyms, we had people just kind of getting like an understanding of like, wow, of the body. The internet was just coming on, and and strength and conditioning in general was getting more and more accepted. Okay, back in like the 80s was when strength and conditioning started to hit like college universities and football teams, and we had coaches like in Nebraska where they now had strength and conditioning facilities at universities. It just exploded. So, but since then, now it seems like everybody and their brother has become like a personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach or what have you, right? So when I was training, well, let me back up a second. What has happened, because everybody and their brother is a strength and conditioning coach, and then facilities have popped up, is that from a business standpoint, when a facility or a coach can sign a whole team, usually they can get paid more per hour than they would if they're training athletes one-on-one. Okay. Now, I've seen pricing for one-on-one strength and conditioning anywhere from like $25 on the low end to $250, or $1,200 a month, like whatever, depending on the program. It can go anywhere up or down from there. Okay. So, but what happened was that team training then became not just about the training, but it was almost like a team building activity. And the idea was that, hey, our team can go, we can have a technical practice and then we can go work out as a team, and we're a team. But then team training became team building. And that's where things get kind of fall apart a little bit. Now, even on the Olympic level, when you make a national team, you usually have a strength and conditioning coach who's part of that national team program. Good national team programs will have like one coach or maybe two coaches per program. Even within the sport, like Red Bull, like for instance, Red Bull has sponsored athletes who go to their own training facility, right? And they get extra special training, right? But the idea here is that what ends up happening is, I call it just the 30-40-30 breakdown. And what I mean by that is like your top 30% of your team is not served by the training program that's being given. Your middle 40% is usually okay. Your bottom 30% of your team is not being served by the training program either. All right. So, all my love goes out to all the strength and conditioning coaches out there, because I've been one. I understand kind of what it's what it's about. I've also been on the athlete side of it. I've been on the business side of it. But one of the things that happens with a lot of these team training programs, even at the Olympic level, is that coach, that strength and conditioning coach, is not necessarily the best strength and conditioning coach. For a lot of coaches, it is a hell of a resume builder, right? To say that you've like worked at the Olympic Training Center or you worked with the national team, that's really great when you move on. And so that's something to be understood. But I think what's really important to understand is that every coach does the best with what they know at the time. Okay, they do the best with what they know at the time. And so I look back on the strength and conditioning coaches that I had, especially through my Olympic career, and I had some great ones and I had some ones that were really suspect. But I'm sure at the time, even those suspect ones were doing the best that they could with what they knew at the time. Okay. One strength coach that I had who was fantastic was Jeff Shire, who we had the leading up into the Olympics. And my doubles partner and I, Mark Gomet, we went into the Olympics and we had the fastest starts in the race, which was, I think, of the second run, we had the fastest start of the race. The first run, we were beat out by the Canadians, Clay Ives and Bob Gasper, but who's counting? But that strength coach helped me get to that level. But what happens though is that even that coach can only do so much. And so one of the things that needs to happen is that as a parent with an aspiring athlete, you have to understand that your athlete has needs specific to them. And while there's certain things about programs that can go, like every athlete can have better mobility. Every athlete can be stronger. But how you get there goes into that 30-40-30. Like if we give a blanket program to the whole team, 30% at the top are going to be missing out. 30% of the bottom are going to be missing out. 40% of the middle are going to be okay. And so the question is, like, where does your athlete fit? Now, for this athlete, for this dad I was talking about, their athlete was clearly in the top 30%. All right, and had some needs. Like this athlete had gone through a massive growth spurt, still had a lot of baby fat on him, for lack of a better term, and what happens is now there's a lot of cool kind of modalities and training methodologies that are available out there, and the internet has just helped us even more, because if you've got an athlete with certain needs, it's easy to find programs that can help those needs. And then but for that coach, they may not be knowledgeable enough to do it, and you'd be better served finding someone locally, or maybe you find somebody on a referral. Now, the best advice I was ever given on this by one of my strength and conditioning coaches was the best program is the one you're not on. Okay. So the best program is the one that you're not on. And so as athletes and parents and coaches, kind of always looking at the other thing without really giving 100% to the thing that you could be doing. So even though maybe you could be looking elsewhere for help, if you just dove into the current program you're on, you'd be better off. Okay. Um, so, uh, but it's all about just kind of going like, what does my athlete need? Now, what I recommend to all my parents and all my athletes is to get second opinions. What's tough about this sometimes is that some programs demand that you work with their dude or dudette, right? And if you go elsewhere, it's like you're kind of it's like bad form. It's just not, it's not really nice to do. But in the end game, our deal here as coaches is to get the athlete to the next level. That takes a little bit of an egoless mentality to go, all right, for that coach to go, I don't know everything, but let's go. Like, what do you have in mind? You're looking at this coach or this guy locally. Like, what do you think? Having that conversation with your main person, like maybe you're with a national team or you're with a college program. Some college programs, depending on the sport, they'll have a strength and conditioning coach. They'll have a team of strength and conditioning coaches at the school. And then what happens is they'll have usually the best strength and conditioning coaches go with the best team in that school. So a lot of times it's football. Um, but and then they'll have like a strength and conditioning coach below that person who's now responsible for two teams. Maybe it'll be like softball and lacrosse, or it'll be, soccer and baseball, like whatever. And so it's getting watered down, right? Good people, but not always like the best programming. And getting specific training for the athlete can sometimes fall flat. So you got to keep a heads up there. This year, I had an athlete who was out west, was scheduled to travel to work with their national team out east. But because of COVID and lockdowns and stuff, the parents were wondering, well, what if we just kept our athlete here? And for this particular athlete, my advice was, yeah, you'd probably be better off staying home. They had a very qualified person nearby who was going to probably have better experience than the coach that was on the East Coast. And ultimately, they felt the political pressure to stay east. But understand this: if you can have an approach with your team that you're trying to make your athlete the best they possibly can be, and you have doubts, you have concerns about that local strength and conditioning coach, ask, just being adult about it, not being confrontational, but just coming to it as a group and saying like, all right, listen, we think that our athlete needs to work on this, this, and this, and we don't think we're going to get it with your guy. Even if they say, yeah, well, we can do that for you, I would sometimes think carefully and go like, well, can they? Right. And just start doing your research and looking around. Um, One factor that I'll share is the idea of testing. Pretty much every team I've ever been involved with as an athlete, but then also later coaching athletes, every team has some sort of testing. Like, so a lot of college programs, your athlete steps on the campus in the fall, or maybe they're playing football and they're starting in the spring. But every one of those programs is probably going to have like physical testing where they put your athlete through a gauntlet of stuff, and it varies per sport. But what ends up happening is you end up training for some athletes, you end up training for testing as opposed to training for your sport. I remember in luge, we kind of had that. We had physical testing, and a lot of times the testing felt like it was just there to keep some of the athletes who were good sliders, like they could get down the hill fast, but maybe they're a little like heavy set. It was more of a way to keep them training than the rest of us achieving. And so sometimes it injured some athletes. Like, we had a pull-up test, and then we had athletes who had shoulder surgery primarily because of the pull-up test. But the idea is that sometimes you have to train for testing. And if it's your first season with a program, sometimes training for testing can be the best thing you can do because it really puts you in a good light. Like I had an athlete once who stepped on campus and in the fall, and what we did, this was back in my strength and conditioning days, was that we just trained him for that test. And he showed up on campus as a freshman and finished in the top 5 in a 50-man roster. And obviously the coaches were like, we loved him, right? And that helped set the tone for that freshman year. And then later he didn't have, it's like later he could start working on the things he really needed to work on. But testing was an important thing. So when you're trying to figure out, like, should you use the local coach or should you use a coach outside of the program? Sometimes using that coach outside of the program it's just like getting a second opinion. Like if you're having a surgery, like, hey, here's my athlete. What do you think? And then you go to this other guy. Here's my athlete. What do you think? Right. And maybe you get a third opinion, like whatever. But the idea is like getting knowledge to understand what's the best plan of attack for your athlete to get them to the next level. Because ultimately your physical ability limits you usually the most. You take 2 athletes of equal physical ability, the one with better technical ability usually succeeds, right? So the idea is like you want to maximize your physical ability as much as you can while not getting lost in the technical. And that's where a lot of athletes get lost, is in the technical. Okay. So understand, just to wrap this one up, understand that the training needs to be specific to your athlete. And if the strength and conditioning coach with that team isn't going to be able to providing that, and you get stuck in that 30, 40, 30 ratio that I was talking about, where the 30% of the top are underserved, 30% of the bottom are underserved. If your athlete's right in that 40% in the middle, maybe you're fine. But if your athlete is above or below, they may need extra help, right? Extra work. And that's fine. I think I think every coach knows that their program, if it's a blanket program, they'll all say that they make it specific to each athlete, but that's always rare. But the reason why I call my company Athlete Specific is because I believe that athletes need to be trained specifically for them, right? And that's all based on resources too, time, energy, and money. But get your athlete assessed by multiple coaches, right? So you probably have somebody local who's very talented, runs a business, and those are really the people to go to. Because if their business relies on making athletes better, then and they don't eat if they don't get paid, then that's somebody to really talk to. Okay. But get multiple opinions, get multiple assessments, and you'll know. Realize this, that for most coaches, they are hammers and your athlete is a nail. And so what happens there is that, if you go to a strength and conditioning coach and they are an Olympic lifting coach, they're going to want to do Olympic lifts. If they are a physical therapist, they're going to want to do physical therapy. If they are an agility coach, they're going to want to do agility. Like, you get it, right? But the idea is that you want a coach who's going to be the toolbox, right? And is going to be able to help your athlete with multiple ideas. Usually comes from older coaches. I think of Mike Boyle in Boston, who's phenomenal. Eric Cressy, who's now down in Florida. Mark Verstegen, who used to be out in Phoenix with Exos, Athletes Performance, now Exos. I think there's a lot of strength and conditioning coaches who have mobility backgrounds who are better than a lot of physical therapists. Okay. And please, please, please never take your athlete to a surgeon for an opinion on a mobility issue, because they'll just want to give rest and avoid surgery. And that's not something that makes elite athletes, right? So just you're better off finding a qualified strength and conditioning coach who's got a mobility kind of education there, and you're going to get a tremendous response, like helping your athlete get stronger and more mobile. I see it happen over and over and over again. So that is a great that's a great question. So if that resonates with anybody, please you can leave me a comment, leave me a like. That'd be great. If you got any things you want to clarify, just go ahead and leave in the comments, depending on where you are. All right. This is good numbers on this. Good numbers going on this tonight. The new time seems to be working. If you like this new time, let me know. So last question. So this was funny. I got Joel Rose, if you hear this, who's a lacrosse. He's got a young lacrosse player. He was coaching a team. He had this issue, and then a couple weeks later, I got a question from a dad who was a baseball coach. And hey there, Adrian. Good to see you. Hey, Adrian, this probably resonates. So appreciate that. So the question was, this dad is a coach, and they went to a tournament, and the tournament was age specific. I believe the athletes that this coach was working with were about 13, 14 years old. So already, right when I say that, there's a big gap in development, right, at those ages, and so even if your athlete is not a team sport athlete, this is a question that can resonate with you because losses can happen at any time. Okay, so what happened was this coach took a team of kids to a tournament, and first and foremost, the tournament was a stretch for them. Like, it was like kind of out of season. The parents had done a ton of fundraising. They were all burned out, but the kids were excited to go to this tournament. And so, but they get to this tournament and they get blown out by a team that is local to them, right? So everybody's travels away to this tournament, and then you end up playing like a local team, and that team basically loaded up their roster with kids that were older by a year and therefore physically a higher ability, and this guy's team got smoked. Okay, so the question was, how do we get the most out of our team that just got blown out? How do we recover from this? And so my first answer to this was to try to avoid getting surprised in the first place. And basically what happened here was they were sabotaged. This was the question from the coach, because I work with 2 youth baseball teams, and we recently traveled with one of them to an out-of-state tournament where an opposing team came stacked with older age players. Needless to say, we got destroyed. What should I tell our kids so they stay positive and want to keep playing? It was rough. Thanks for all you do, Chris. And Chris was in Iowa. So try to avoid getting surprised if you can. Okay. But what happens here a lot is that we want to focus on our athletes on their improvement. We don't want to. We want to stay away from what's called the gap, which is like, and as athletes, we tend to always get stuck in the gap, which is like, even if we do well, there's still a horizon that we're trying to hit. Problem is that horizon is always in the distance, right? Michael Phelps, the greatest Olympian of all times, wins 8 Olympic gold medals, but probably wanted to win 9, right? Like, so if you're stuck in that gap, then you're never really content with where you've come from. And so I think I took a lacrosse team years ago from Calgary, Alberta, or Okotoks, just south of Calgary, and down to a tournament in Denver. And what was really interesting when we arrived there was that I brought 5 kids down from Alberta. I ended up coaching a team there, which was a lot of work because I'm taking these Colorado kids and bringing in these Canadian kids. And we had one kid who was really small, and he was very undersized for the teams we were playing. And I just told him, I said, listen, developmentally, you've been a cross country athlete and you love lacrosse. And I explained to him the shortcomings that he was going to have to deal with when he got onto the field. And so some people don't do that. And it doesn't make sense to me, because I think when you do that, you're basically preparing an athlete to be optimistic and realistic at the same time. Okay. So one thing that I would have done with this baseball team, as I walked out to the field and saw the other team, which was a much larger, I would have told my guys that, listen, you all have normal sized parents. Like, we're not a team of little people, right? You are going to get that size and that strength eventually. We're just not going to have it today. And unless the opposing team like warms up in the parking lot and you don't see them, you probably see these kids before the game, right? Happens really in hockey and football and basketball, like you name it, right? You're going to see it. And so knowing that there's going to be a bit of a size gap here, that takes a little bit of the pressure off those kids. Okay. And I think I love so I'm reading Learned Optimism by Dr. Martin Seligman, which I just love, and he talks about how like the difference between optimism and pessimism. And what's really interesting is that when you are going into a situation that is not uh, of um, of high, what's the word I'm looking for, high like concern. So if you're going into a situation that is of high concern, you want to be pessimistic. Like when NASA put the first people into space, right? It's important to be pessimistic there because you're thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong. If you watch the movie Hidden Figures, which I highly recommend, with Kevin Costner, phenomenal movie. But it's about these African American women who are basically, they call them the computers, and these men, all these white men couldn't figure out how this like parabolic curve. The guy from Big Bang Theory is also in it. For those of you guys who are Big Bang Theory fans, but they're trying to figure out this like parabolic curve, and nobody can figure out it. But what ends up happening is this black woman who's one of the computers figures it out, right? And it launches this massive, like really cool story at NASA where they brought all the computers, which were all African American, and they brought them into the program. And IBM computers couldn't even figure out this, but they could. So the idea is that in that situation, you want to be pessimistic. But in other situations that are not as like life and death, you want to be optimistic. So I want to encourage these kids to be optimistic, right? And go like, all right, listen, I know we're looking out here and we're going to get hooped because the other team is like, they look like they're Amazon guys, but here's what we can do. And then laying out the places where the kids can succeed. Now, the good news was in this story, because I wrote back to this dad, the good news was the pitcher on this other team wasn't phenomenal. So they still had a bit of an opportunity at the plate. They just got killed at home plate. And I'll talk about that in a second. So you want your athlete to go into a situation and not be pessimistic and predict their failure, but to be optimistic and look for places where they can be the best that they can be, right? And be critical of themselves, because what happens for those athletes on that other team who are big, I call them man babies. Like, you know, my son's 15 years old and he's like my size. I call him a man baby. And the problem with athletes who are just like physically large, who end up having a strength because not because they did much to get it, but because Mother Nature kind of gifted them with it, they don't get the same amount of learning for those younger, smaller athletes who have to be more gritty and more strategic and more technical. Hey there, Liz Loza, if you're still there. So one of the things that needs to happen is that this puts an athlete's in that optimistic mindset. All right, okay, listen, we're just gonna make the most of this, right? And we're gonna see what we can do here in this better situation, right? I also teach my athletes the Goldilocks theory, right? And so this helps athletes shift into learning mode. Hey there, Kelly Severn. I introduced mine as my man child. That's true. I've seen your son. He is a man child. Holy smokes. That Finland jersey barely fit him. And I love the Sweden one with the gummy worm, the gummy fish. That was really cool. So I think it's really important to always get an athlete into learning mode, because if they're just putting in their time, what ends up happening is either they feel like their time is well spent or they feel like they're wasting their time. And for these kids that were in Iowa playing baseball, they could have they probably walked away thinking that they wasted their time. And that's not true. They learned a ton. They could have learned more if they'd gone into the situation a little bit better prepared mentally, but it's neither here nor there. The idea here is that kids always want to win, right? Like I love when, you know, my kids were playing youth soccer and the league didn't keep track of scores. You know, it's like, come on. You know, what was our bench doing? They knew if we were up by 6 or we were down by 6. They knew. They all knew. So kids want to win. But what happens is that if they think they're not going to win, sometimes they can easily get caught, and they feel like they're wasting their time and they're no longer learning. So we want to be in that learning mode. By preparing our kids to understand, our athletes to understand that, like I call it the Goldilocks theory, right? There's some games you go into and the competition is going to be perfectly matched, right? And this is part of long-term athlete development, right? We want a certain percentage of games that are equally matched. But we're also going to go into situations where that porridge is too cold and we're going to roll over the other team, okay? But we want to be learning in those situations. We want to be coming out of the situations, not going like, hey, we won, it was easy, no big deal. But it's like, okay, within that game, what could we do better? Like what did we do well? What could we have worked on, improved, not just as a team, but as individuals, right? And that's really important because especially for athletes that are developmentally advanced and they're above, they're big and that gives them an advantage. Maybe they're a big goalie, maybe they're a big football player, right? Every year I see on ESPN, they'll come up with some kid in some town who's like 7 feet tall and he's 300 pounds and he's a lineman and he's just rolling over everybody in high school. And everybody's like, oh, he's going to get drafted this year. Problem is that the problem is that kid isn't necessarily learning and he gets passed over later because those technical kids who finally grow, they did really, really well. So as coaches in this situation, it's like, all right, you're going up against a team and that porridge is too hot, right? We're just going to get destroyed. But what can our athletes do within that situation that can help them learn, right? That help them improve. And there's a million things, depending on your sport, there's a million things. I remember in my luge days, we would have athletes that flew down the track because they were big. I remember all of our American women used to hate some of the German girls because they were like massive, right? And they won like ridiculous amounts of races. But what happened in those situations was that the athletes started to think, hey, I can't wait for those athletes just to retire so then I can get my chance. Well, that's kind of a defeatist attitude. We want them to be able to find whatever it is within their game, within their performance that they need to improve. Because if they're winning because they're big dudes, then and they're not being critical of like, oh, I won today because I was big, then they're going to miss out on that technical ability to improve. Right? I've seen this happen in so many sports, and yeah, so that's super important. I want in a situation where your athlete is the underdog. Okay, I want them to get their back up. Right? I want them to get upset. Right? And I think so. Interesting story. Back in like the mid 2000s, I was actually vice president of Luge Canada. So I'll go, but I was privy to a meeting with Own the Podium, and Own the Podium is a faction of the Canadian Olympic Committee that basically is designed to allocate funds to athletes to help them win medals. And with the 2010 Olympic Games in Vancouver, there was obviously a big pitch to that. But what I learned in this was they had done their research and they found that the country in the world that had the best percentage of athletes who during the year were like World Cup athletes, like skiing, speed skating, luge, bobsled, you name it, athletes who were out of the top 6 who then medaled at the Olympic Games. The best country in the world for that was the United States. The worst country in the world to have athletes who were in the top 3 in the world, but then who basically choked at the Olympic Games was Canada. And I chalked that up to the fact that in the United States, we're pretty confident, and to the outside world, we're fairly cocky. And in Canada, everybody's so damn polite that was the cause. But what I found really interesting about this is I think one thing I think that in the United States we do really well of is playing the underdog when we are the underdog. And that's a talent that I think every athlete needs to understand. And so for these kids in Iowa, I told this coach that, hey, listen, going into that game, you've got to bring out your best underdog story, right? You've got to be watching Bad News Bears, man. You got to be watching like some pretty inspirational movies to go like, all right, listen, guys, we're not going to get stuck in the gap here. We're not going to get stuck in this idea that, this is going to be a waste of time. We're going to give them hell and we're going to bite their ankles off and we're going to make this a game as much as we can. Now, the cool thing that happened for Ellis Redford, because the parents of the kids also would be beneficial to buy into this as well. They can undermine that learning mode as well with negativity. Totally true. Totally true, Ellis. Like I've been in situations where parents go one way, the kids are fine, and parents all of a sudden go like, yeah, whatever. Like I'm the only person I know of that runs a mental performance program for both the athletes and the parents. Usually parents send their kids like a sports psychologist to go, can you fix my kid? I'm the only person that does a program that works with both. And so, and it's exactly for that reason, because the parents on the sideline can go, they can bring their adult, their experienced attitude to it and just pull it apart and destroy that little bit of, not a little bit, but that give them hell attitude on the sideline. One thing that was kind of cool about this story, and I just want to finish this off, and I'll finish for today. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you're doing this, please leave me a like or a thumbs up or heart wherever you're on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. I really appreciate it. I hope you share this with a parent or an athlete or coach who could benefit from it. The cool thing about this story of these kids from Iowa was that the pitcher on their team, on the losing team, he didn't do very well. Their batters, even though the balls were coming like pretty quick, but the other team's pitcher wasn't great either. But anyway, their team's pitcher didn't have a great day. This was a great opportunity for this team to really rally around their pitcher. And I think this is the thing we want from sports, right? For our kids and for our athletes. And I know when I did bobsled much later, like in my 30s, I started doing bobsled. That idea of being around a team and assembling a team. Bill Schuffenhauer's on here, U.S. Olympian bobsledder. He knows this feeling too. That idea of assembling a team of guys that, like, you've got the driver. I was a pilot. I was a driver. You could. The one driving the sled, and then you had then you're looking to assemble. You got two big guys on the side on the foreman, and they got a little speedy dude on the back, and you're assembling that team. That's a skill that we want our kids to bring with them for the rest of their life. Was this idea of how do you surround yourself with people who can help you, right? It's an entrepreneurial approach. It's not just like a one man only approach. The idea here is that this team can really rally around their pitcher. And so what I told their coach to do after the fact was just to lay out their team like, listen, guys, that other team kind of took advantage of the situation, and it's really easy to win when you're outsizing everybody. But laying out all of the specifics and really praising the kids and I implored this coach to find something for every one of his kids where they did something really well, where they could build off of, right, to really help them with their confidence. And also what I encouraged him to do was really work on what's called explanatory style. This idea of like, hey, yeah, that pitcher might have, thrown a strike against that big dude, and that's a great thing for that pitcher. Maybe it was a really good pitch. But if that pitcher's explanatory inside his style, explanatory style in his head is negative, then he's losing all the benefits out of that, right? So, and kids now, like with the internet, is like super pessimistic. We've got to do everything we can to help, and I'll work on that in another video for you guys. But that idea of like explanatory style is so important. Okay, so it allowed this coach to get his team to help really rally around this guy. And what was cool was, like, as you know, I hope this happened later, where one of the other kids on the team told the pitcher, like, Jimmy, listen, man, you did a great job. We all did the best that we could do. It wasn't that, we did poorly as batters and we lost because of that. It's more like, listen, we all did the best that we could do and we're moving on. And one thing I told this coach too is, like, if this is an anomaly, like if this is like one event in a whole string of events, just forget it. Like, don't worry about it. For my Instagram, guys, I'm going to lose you here in about 52 seconds. I'm going just a hair long. I'm just going to wrap up here for everybody else. But this was a great experience. And I think what's really cool from it is that we need our athletes to understand there's always something good to come out of it, no matter what the scoreboard says. Okay. So listen, I'm going to wrap it up here. I got like 8 seconds to go or 32 seconds to go here on Instagram. But hey, if you like this, do me a favor, leave me a comment and say, hey, great job. Or if you got a question you want me to cover in a future one, I'm going to do these every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be posting the audio on iTunes. So if you go to iTunes and you search for Creating High Performance Athletes, that podcast, if you haven't already, please come join our private Facebook group called Creating High Performance Athletes. You can find it there. All right, so just give a search and I'll let you in, answer the 3 questions. If you got a question for me, email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. And yeah, I look forward to helping your athlete. And if I'm looking forward to it. So Chris Kunkel, thanks a lot. Ellis Redford, thank you. Appreciate it. And Kelly Severn and Adrian Greiner, good to see you guys. To my Park City crew. All right, guys. Take care. Have a great night. Cheers.